Welcome to WHRO's Weekly Edition. I'm Doug Boynton. In this week's program, we'll update you on a study conducted by Chesapeake to assess its industrial waterfront. The Navy fired the head of a Norfolk-based destroyer squadron recently back to the area from the Middle East. And WHRO's Barry Graham takes us all the way back to the heyday of Virginia Beach's Peppermint Club.
The vibe was fun, celebration. Isn't this a great place? And aren't we all lucky to be here?
It's WHRO's Weekly Edition. 1/3 of Virginia Beach households spend more than 30% of their earnings on housing, and that includes many who are working the city's most common jobs. All that comes from the beach's newly released housing report. We get the details from WHRO's Ryan Murphy.
High housing costs are leaving many employed in Virginia Beach's tourism industry strapped.
There's thousands of workers living in Virginia Beach that do not earn enough to comfortably afford rent.
That's Virginia Beach Housing Director Ruth Hill at a city council meeting in January. The new housing report details several steps the city could take to address its affordable housing crisis. They range from empowering the city to finance residential development itself to fighting the stigma around high-density housing. The City Council is expected to weigh in on the report's recommendations in March. Ryan Murphy, WHRO News.
Chesapeake has been studying what to do with its historically industrial waterfront. The latest from WHRO's Catherine Hafner.
Most of the land around the Elizabeth River in Chesapeake has been used mainly for heavy industry. Lucy Stahl with the city told WHRO last year they want to connect more people to the river without getting rid of industry.
A lot of places across the country are figuring out what to do with aged and falling out of use industrial areas and how do we redevelop that into something new. But in Chesapeake, we're saying, no, this is still good and has room for growth.
A new report says the city should keep waterfront space open to support the offshore wind industry, for example. The study area includes parts of South Norfolk, Great Bridge, and Deep Creek. Residents surveyed there say they want more access to the waterfront through things like parks and restaurants. They also expressed concerns about existing traffic and flooding. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
The Chesapeake Planning Commission voted Wednesday to adopt the study. The Nansemond Indian Nation opened a health clinic Monday in Portsmouth. The tribe will treat its own members, Medicaid recipients, and the uninsured. More on that from WHRO's Laura Fillion.
Under federal law, the government or indigenous tribes can administer care to their population.
By taking care of our own health, we are able to provide to our own citizens, and we're also able to provide to other federal payees, in this case, Medicaid.
That's Nansemond Tribal Counselor David Darling. He says the tribe feels it has an obligation to provide care to other underserved groups in Hampton Roads. That's why they're offering primary care and pharmacy services in one spot, and chose to build in Portsmouth near 4 bus lines. Laura Fillion, WHRO News.
William and Mary Professor Randy Coleman teaches a course titled The Chemistry of Emotion and Behavior. He and I had a chat about the chemistry behind love and also loss. The discussion has been edited for time and begins with the question, what happens when we fall in love?
The first things that happen, most likely, there are regions of the brain that start releasing a chemical called dopamine, which is a chemical that produces a very pleasurable, even addictive effect. In fact, it is the chemical that has led to the opiate crisis, for example. So we know it can be very addictive. But it also is considered to be the love hormone, if you want to think about it like that. And as we start falling in love with someone, when we are in their presence, our brains are being flooded with dopamine that gives us a very nice, pleasurable feeling toward the individual that we're falling for.
As a relationship progresses, that kind of immediate high goes away. And what is that replaced with if we figure that the relationship continues?
Well, if the relationship is continuing, then another chemical called oxytocin can come into play, and this is a chemical that helps to produce pair bonding. In fact, when we study various other animals on the planet, in particular the prairie voles, VOLES, are very well known for having high levels of oxytocin in their bloodstreams, and they mate for life. So there's a very tight pair bond there. So I would say after you get over the infatuation period, the next important chemical that steps into play is oxytocin.
If the relationship goes on the rocks and there's a breakup and people sometimes feel like their heart might be breaking, it's not really their heart. You tell me it's in their brain.
Yes, it's really in their brain. And if they're breaking up, that can produce a lot of stress in both individuals, potentially. And if we look at the stress hormones, then we're starting to get into things like cortisol and so on that are being produced by the adrenal glands, which are outside the brain. But those stress hormones through the bloodstream get back into the brain and start changing some of the pathways that were important in the relationship. So those stress hormones come into play at that point, and they can really kind of mess up a lot of the neural networks that are in the brain.
And yet we sometimes, often, hopefully, reach a point where all of that levels out and we go back to what can pass for normal, right?
Yes, but if you're in a long-term relationship, for example, my wife and I are in our 58th year of marriage, so we've gone past the infatuation period, and we're just in a nice, very comfortable, lifelong relationship. We're happy with each other. And if I think about happiness, there's another neurotransmitter that really comes into play, and that's serotonin. And serotonin is considered to be the happy contentment type of hormone that gets kicked out in the brain. You're going to settle down and see more serotonin showing up in the brain when you're around your love partner, your spouse, or however you want to think about it, and that's going to lead to potentially lifelong contentment.
Professor Coleman is retiring this year after 54 years of service to the university. In 2018, he received the school's Graves Award for excellence in teaching, and we are reliably told he is adored by his students. We wish him and you much serotonin this Valentine's Day. Doug Boynton, WHRO News. The Navy fired the head of the Norfolk-based destroyer squadron that recently returned from the Middle East. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh tells us what's next for the squad.
Captain William Harkin was Commodore of Destroyer Squadron 2. He oversaw the 3 destroyers in the Gerald Ford Strike Group, which returned to Norfolk in January after an 8-month deployment. Ironically, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff visited one of the destroyers Friday, the USS Ramage. General C.Q. Brown says the ships were in a tense situation in the Gulf, especially after they were extended by 2 months when war broke out in Gaza in October.
We've got to stay focused. At the same time, we've got to be thoughtful about the approaches we take, because we do not want to have a miscalculation that has something spread much broader than it already is. It's complex.
Harkin was relieved for loss of confidence in his ability to command, which is a phrase the Navy often uses when firing commanders without revealing the cause. Harkin took command in February 2023, only months before the strike group was deployed in May. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Parking lots cover a lot of land in Hampton Roads, but local officials are starting to see them as an opportunity for resilience. WHRO climate reporter Catherine Hafner uncovers what that means for the area.
Many parking lots around the region were built decades ago. They weren't designed to handle the amount of rain and sea level rise that now overwhelms our stormwater systems. Here's Ben McFarland with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission.
We probably wouldn't build those parking lots the same way now if we were building them from scratch today.
The Commission is looking into how to transform parking lots so they can actually help the environment. That includes planting greenery and replacing asphalt with permeable pavers. McFarland says they allow water to pass through underground instead of running into storm drains.
If we can reduce the amount of rainwater that's getting into those pipes to begin with, that lessens the strain on the system.
Capturing water on site also stops pollution from reaching local waterways. The Commission's small asphalt parking lot currently looks very typical. It's mostly gray with some shrubbery scattered throughout. But Jill Sunderland says soon it will look a lot different.
The parking lot, when we're finished, is going to be very aesthetically pleasing. I mean, it's going to look great.
That will include a bioretention basin running through the middle of the lot, filled with native plants that can help filter and absorb excess water. They'll also replace the asphalt with a more porous surface to drain even more water. Sunderland says the Commission's uniquely positioned to show people how to rethink parking lots. And she says they won't be losing any parking spaces. In fact, they'll gain one. Catherine Hafner, WHRO News.
A North Carolina Medical Society Foundation and an Outer Banks Healthcare Task Force are teaming up to build the area's pool of healthcare providers. WHRO's Laura Fillion has more on that partnership.
The new program will bring in 2 medical students at a time to work in the community for a month. Organizers hope the students will come back after they graduate. Manteo Healthcare Task Force Chair Malcolm Fearing says it's not just a matter of having enough care for the year-round residents of Dare County. There's the growing tourist population to account for, too.
This is not going to go away. As we grow as a community, our needs in whether it's mental health, addiction, primary care, our needs are going to grow also.
The Outer Banks population swells to between 250 and 300,000 during tourist season. 3 doctors left Manteo in 2022, Fearing says. It left about 2,700 people without a primary care provider. Laura Fillion, WHRO News.
Two years ago, the Pentagon enacted a policy designed to keep extremists out of the military. But in practice, it can be hard to distinguish extremism from protected political speech. Andrew Dyer of the American Homefront Project reports on a recent case involving a Navy SEAL in San Diego.
It's probably one of the best views in the whole place is right up on top of the hill.
Judy Bailey Savage drives her side-by-side ATV along the fence of her ranch in Temecula, California.
There's Big Bear over there. That's the other range. There's Lake Skinner.
Atop a hill overlooking Temecula's wine country, she points out the expanse of Savage Ranch.
The Savage Ranch goes from back here all the way up past there and the lot in front of it. So it's fairly large.
The ranch serves as a refuge and retreat for LGBTQ+ people, activists and artists seeking a safe space. But Savage says the community has been threatened. When the local school board debated the state social studies curriculum and gay student rights, conservative activists began speaking at the meetings. Among those, active duty Navy SEAL Bryce Henson, who attended rallies and meetings alongside members of the Proud Boys and other extremist groups. Savage says Henson threatened her in a late-night phone call.
I asked him, "Why are you stalking me? Why are you calling me, stalking me?" after he came unhinged like the second time. And he goes, "Well, I've already surveilled your property."
She says she told the Navy, but nothing happened. Months later, in November, the service finally launched an investigation into Henson, but advocates say the harassment continued. Last month, Henson sent a video of himself to an Instagram account that tracks extremists. He's in his Navy uniform shooting guns. The caption said he wanted to share his skill set after certain people leaked his job history to the press. The owner of the Instagram account spoke to us on condition of anonymity.
It's scary having somebody send you threatening messages when they've been trained by the U.S. military to be a killing machine. To me, it's clearly threatening. He said, "Share with your friends," was his message with it. And he had sent me other messages before saying, "Show your face."
The Navy classifies Henson's investigation as administrative and won't comment on any action it takes. But a Navy official with knowledge of the case says the investigation found Henson engaged in threatening behavior but didn't violate the Pentagon's extremism rules. Bishop Garrison is a senior fellow with the National Security Institute at George Mason Law School. He led the Pentagon's working group that helped craft the military extremism rules. He says the policy on extremist behavior is written broadly. For more to be done, he says lawmakers need to act.
What we need is for elected officials, particularly members of Congress, to stand up and make some very specific laws and rules around what our expectations of this type of behavior really truly should be.
While he didn't comment on Henson specifically, Garrison says it's important for the Pentagon to investigate allegations of extremism among the ranks.
This activity has a direct outsized impact. Not only can you deteriorate unit cohesion, not only can you disrupt the good order and discipline of units, people get hurt.
In an emailed statement, Henson didn't comment on the allegations. Instead, he writes that he's a father who's being smeared. Back at Savage Ranch, another Temecula activist, Pastor Rachel Dennis, says Henson and his thousands of followers have people in the LGBTQ plus community scared.
Because we see that extremism and the language on his Instagram, which can then produce the violence in some people, and so sometimes, we're sitting out here scared, honestly.
The Navy official says Henson could receive minor punishment for engaging in threatening behavior, but he could also face more serious repercussions, such as being kicked out of the SEALs or the Navy altogether. The Pentagon policy says troops who are found to have participated in extremist activity are expelled from the military. Reporting from San Diego, I'm Andrew Dyer.
This story was produced by the American Homefront Project, a public media collaboration that reports on American military life and veterans. This is WHRO's weekly edition. Remember, for any stories you've missed, you can visit us on the WHRO smartphone app or all social media platforms. Suffolk will hire 18 firefighters in the next 3 years thanks to a $4 million FEMA grant. The latest from WHRO's Laura Fillion.
The new positions will help fill a new firehouse and offset future retirements. Fire Chief Michael Baraki says an increase in retirements and a drop in recruitment makes it hard for the department to keep up with Suffolk's growth. The department's next academy will have between 30 and 50 recruits who will be ready to work by mid-2025. Laura Fillion, WHRO News.
Greg Underwood, Norfolk's first black Commonwealth's attorney, died last weekend at the age of 68. A look at his life from WHRO's Michelle Hankerson.
Underwood had several public highs and lows in his career. He was charged with a DUI that he challenged in court in 2013. In 2018, he introduced a no-cash bail policy that still stands today in Norfolk. That same year, he announced his office would dismiss marijuana possession cases. That decision was challenged and ended up in front of the Virginia Supreme Court. Underwood died of complications from a recent cancer diagnosis. Full service details haven't been announced yet. Michelle Hankerson, WHRO News.
Charles Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently arrived in Norfolk to thank the crew of the USS Gerald R. Ford. WHRO military reporter Steve Walsh reports on the visit and Brown's ties to the area.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Charles Q. Brown greeted sailors from the USS Ford and USS Ramage who returned to Norfolk in January after 8 months. The ship's deployment was extended after war broke out in Gaza in October.
Part of my trip today was to come here and tell them thank you, and tell them how proud of them and the work that they were able to do and the impact they had.
Brown spent part of his childhood in Hampton Roads. His father was in the Army and was stationed locally. Brown graduated from the former Homer L. Ferguson High School in Newport News in 1980.
It's a real pleasure to be back here in Hampton Roads. The reason I say back is I went to high school in Newport News and was married in Fort Monroe. And so I have a connection to this part of the country.
Confirmed in September, Brown became only the second African American to serve as head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff after Colin Powell. This is the first time African Americans have served as both the Defense Secretary and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs at the same time. Steve Walsh, WHRO News.
Three decades have passed since a famed Virginia Beach night spot shuttered. WHRO's Barry Graham takes us back to a groovier time.
30 years ago, the curtain came down on a beloved local venue, a place that today, longtime residents still reverently refer to it by a single name. Located at 15th and Oceanfront was the Peppermint, officially the Peppermint Beach Club.
There was a sense of freedom. You could come in right off the beach.
That's Bobby Fisher, remembering what it was like to be at the Peppermint.
nobody looked at anybody judgmentally. Everybody was there for one thing, to listen to music, to dance, to make a friend or two, but really just the vibe was fun, celebration. Isn't this a great place? And aren't we all lucky to be here?
Dating to the 1920s, when Virginia Beach was a mere sleepy beach resort, the Peppermint booked legends like Fats Domino and Ray Charles.
They're doing the mess around. They're doing the mess around.
However, as Virginia Beach began to grow, so did the Peppermint's reputation, and by the late 1960s, a local band made the Peppermint one of the hottest venues in the region. Bill Deal and the Rondells anchored as the Peppermint House Band in 1965. Soon, lines were out the door. Don Quisenberry was a Rondell and remembers the Peppermint years.
Well, the crowds were always huge because they would line up. It would close from 6 to 7, and their line would be 2 blocks long. And they'd come in, and we'd just play, and they'd dance, and it was a lot of fun.
What was the real lure of the Peppermint? It was a place to dance, listen to an emerging band that would eventually have top 10 hits and play at Madison Square Garden. And according to Bob Christie, who in 1966 was a student at Norview High School, at the beach, it was a nonstop party.
It was a friendly environment. It was, I don't remember any issues coming up there other than just a lot of happy sounds and great music. You knew by just some of the sand you shuffled through, too, because people could come in and they could be served at the back, but it was just a great fun.
Bill Deal would eventually jump to a rival club, Rogues, where he again would be a major draw. The Peppermint remained. However, the heyday of the club always was the years that Deal anchored there. In 1994, the last concert played at the Peppermint. It had limped on through the 80s, and some national acts had made stops there. But the beach was changing. By 1990, plans were being made for an amphitheater. Other venues that had stood with the Peppermint were also disappearing. The music had changed, and the feel and vibe of the oceanfront was also different.
Just to have a location that it's kind of like a magnet or a draw where people felt good. I mean, I do think that today, if the Peppermint was still there, it would be an older scene, but you'd still have people just enjoying the atmosphere and a destination to go to.
In 1995, the building was razed, erasing a structure, but not the memories of a great venue that helped define an era in the city of Virginia Beach. For WHRO News, I'm Barry Graham.
You've been listening to WHRO's Weekly Edition. We had help today from Ryan Murphy, Catherine Hafner, Laura Fillion, Steve Walsh, Michelle Hankerson, and Barry Graham. Andrew Dyer with the American Homefront Project, also Connor Worley, who produced today's broadcast. A reminder, you can always catch full episodes of the Weekly Edition podcast feed. You can get your news updates at WHRO.org and the WHRO Reports podcast feed. For all of us at WHRO and WHRV, I'm Doug Boynton.